Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the AMCHAM Intergenerational Tension in the Workplace webinar, co-hosted by Morgan Philips. Before we begin, I want to thank Christina Oh, the Managing Director of Morgan Philips, for her great contributions to AMCHAM. Her leadership has made the AMCHAM Women's Leadership Committee one of the most active at AMCHAM. She's also created this exclusive opportunity for us to discuss a topic that affects all of us. As you all know, millennials make up a significant portion of the workforce. We now work with younger employees who have their own unique generation of values and skills. These different values and skills can lead to intergenerational tension and conflict, leading to the use of terms like akunde. It is now more important than ever for companies to examine how to create a harmonious work environment so that the various generations of employees can collaborate effectively. AMCHAM and Morgan Philips have brought together leaders from different generational groups and different multinational companies in Korea for this panel discussion on what I call a very, very fun topic. We have a few special guests with us today. First, Mr. O.H. Kwon, the Senior Vice President and President of Qualcomm APAC. In fact, I'm so proud of this guy. He just became the new head of Qualcomm in APAC and was just announced less than a week ago. So very honored to have you today, OH. Next, we have JiWon Oh, who is the head of the shell companies here in Korea. She has an outstanding track record and an amazing reputation here in Korea. So thank you so much for joining us today. Next, we have Rob Colliers. He is the head of Colliers, a leading real estate company. And obviously, he is new to Korea. And I'm so happy to have him here with us today. Would love to hear his insights, given his different backgrounds compared to the audience here. And lastly, we have Tyler Joo, who is the head of marketing for ABInBev. I think it's a company that many of us enjoy consuming in some regards. In fact, Tyler Joo is someone who I'd look at as someone with a bright future, both here in Korea and abroad. I know he's going to run some big companies one day. You know, each of our panelists have lived and worked in different parts of the world across different industries. I am sure they have great insights to share, and I'm so excited to hear their unique perspectives. Okay, so now I'm certain that today's session is going to help us create the best work environment for our employees. Okay, so now without further delay, I'd like to introduce Christina Oh, who has been our co-host on this program, to walk us through some real facts and figures about this whole topic. So now, Christina, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Well, Morgan Philips and I are honored and thrilled to be a co-host of this exciting panel, and I'd like to express my gratitude to James Kim for this opportunity. Before we start, I thought it would be meaningful to go over some numbers, like James said, for some greater context for the panel discussion. Okay, so as of today, there are 4 different generations that coexist in the workplace. They're the boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z, who are all kind of have different values and were born in different periods. A recent survey done last year said that almost 8 out of 10 in the workplace feel a generational gap in the workplace. And 53% of millennials say that it is affecting their productivity by creating negative impact. Okay, so I thought this was a really interesting question. How we look at work and what we think about our jobs, it has everything to do with how we approach our attitudes in the workplace. Is having a good job a prerequisite to happiness in life? 6 out of 10 of the boomers and the Gen Xers said this was very important. Only 4 out of the millennials and Gen Z said that having a good job was a prerequisite to their happiness in life, which is very interesting. Okay, this is a very fun question. 회식, which is termed a team building company dinner. All the older generation said that 회식 was necessary for team building, whereas MZ generation, 38% have said that this was a complete waste of time. So it goes to show how differently we look at things that we used to think of as being normal in the workplace have now shifted. So without further ado, I'm just going to hand it back over to James for an amazing discussion on this topic.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina. So now let's get the show on the road, okay? I'm going to ask Tyler Joo the first question, okay? Obviously, you know, we have different definitions of what akunde is. So Tyler, what is your definition of what akunde is?
Thank you, James. I think my take on akunde is someone who is stubborn and somewhat self-righteous, especially when in a position of relative authority over others. And I think most importantly, this is regardless of age or seniority. So that's kind of how I interpret the definition of akunde, or how people think of akundes in today's world. Yeah.
The very, very interesting definition, because someone asked me what my definition of akunde is. And I looked at it as someone who has been in the same company for a long time and someone who's obviously older, just because of the nature of what they've done, right? So that's kind of my very simple definition. So Rob, you know, you've worked, you know, all over the world. I know that you're a Canadian. You worked for in Britain. You've done a lot of different things, right? So what?
It's the other way around. I'm British, but work for a Canadian company.
Oh, that's right. That's. I'm sorry about that. But so Rob, what is your definition of akunde?
Similar to Tyler, I think it's somebody who's stubborn, inflexible, kind of has their own view on the world and is unwilling to accept any other opinion. I think someone who is akunde, again, I agree with Tyler, isn't necessarily an older person. I know a lot of younger people who are unflexible and don't want to adapt, don't want to take anybody else's viewpoint. So I think you can have a young akunde, so to speak.
That's you know, very interesting, Rob, because you know, when I look at OH, obviously he's been, at least from my definition, right? He's been at Qualcomm for decades, right? He is older. I think he's younger than me, but he's still older, right? But I look at him as having that kind of a akunde definition from a big picture perspective. But at the same time, look what has happened to him. He's now the head of APAC for Qualcomm. So obviously he's doing something right. So are you akunde?
Yes, I am, and I'm the king of akunde, as I like 회식 a lot. I'm the king of 회식, so the definition of akunde to me is like whoever acts like your parents, they're akundes. So, and I regret, fully regret, I start calling my parents as akunde when I became a high schooler. And then they were just like over mid-40s. I'm over 50 now. So I fully regret, and I feel like, I'm still in the early 30s. I'm not akunde, but that's not the case. I have to admit, I have to swallow. I'm akunde. And that's the beginning of good relationship with employees. The worst akunde is self-denying akunde. So you have to admit it. And once you admit you are akunde, then the MZ generation, they listen to you at least.
Well, I tell you this, if OH is saying that he's a akunde and has become this successful, we should all want to become a akunde. But now, JiWon, let me ask you a question. Do you feel that the intergenerational differences is creating tension in the workplace today?
I think we're all here so that we can find out. And I do think there are strands and strains of it. For me, the word kunde denotes a kind of frustration. I think OH mentioned a word that to me is really, really important. It's about listening, hearing. So when the counterpart doesn't feel that they're respected or heard, it does lead to this frustration. And I think it's been building up for some time. And I think there are ways to actually harness and perhaps nurture it in a way that's more positive energy for me, my colleagues, for the company. But indeed, I do think there is tension.
Well, that's why, my next question is really about productivity and morale challenges because of the kunde. Tyler, you're kind of right in the middle, I think, for at least from the definition that I've used, right?
Right.
So whether it's at your company or other companies you have worked for in the past, are you seeing productivity and morale challenges because of these kundes?
Yes and no. The reason I would say yes, because I think there are missed opportunities in terms of how the work atmosphere can be better. No, because I don't think of it necessarily as a challenge, but more as an opportunity. Meaning, if the team or the company acknowledges a difference between different generations and addresses it properly, and think of it as an opportunity versus something, basically a problem, and start finding ways to address that opportunity in a productive way. I think it's less of a tension or a challenge, but rather something that can be looked forward to.
OH, at your company, especially in Korea, I'm sure there's a lot of combination of the newer generation and the kondes, as we talked about.
Right.
So as a leader, how did you manage the productivity and the morale issues within your organization?
So the fastest way was to change myself. Like probably kondes around me, they hate what I'm doing. For the younger generations, like for example, at the year-end all-hands meeting, I wear Santa Claus things, I sing a song, do some dances, I go out to the pool and having a pool party for the first time, like right before COVID, something like that. We have never done that before. So those kind of activities and efforts themselves, they feel like, okay, at least the leader of that company try to listen to them and try to entertain them as much as possible. And that attitude itself, it keeps the morale high. It doesn't fix the tension or doesn't, like remove the conflict in the company, but at least you can reduce it. If the employees feel the management, they're paying attention to the issue and try to reduce it. So.
And because I know OH so well, he may say he's a konde, but he uses social media really, really well. So how many kondes do you know that can really effectively use social media like he has? So thank you for sharing some of your insights about dressing up funny in different events and so on.
Right.
Hey Rob, so I think you and I talked before, and I think you had mentioned that you're trying to get rid of a lot of kondes in organizations that you work for.
Yeah, so my definition of konde, as we discussed a few moments ago, is slightly different. It isn't necessarily to do with age, it's more of a mindset. If somebody is very rigid in their views, unwilling to listen to other people's opinions, unwilling to try new things, then yes, those are attributes that I don't really want in my organization. But I don't think those are your definition of Conde. So, yeah.
So JiWon, you know, Christina had a slide that really summarized the different age brackets for different generations. And I'm very proud to say I'm a boomer. Okay, you guys may not like to hear that, but I'm a boomer. OH,
Gen
I believe
X.
you're Gen X, right? I'm not going to go across the room here, but there are different generations. So, JiWon, I'm sure you've had a chance to work with different generations. What are some key differences that you have noticed? Is there even a difference just because of their age profile?
One of the things we do at Shell, we don't do the customary, when you first come on board, we don't say how old I am, what school I went to. We really don't do that. We do talk about the experience, what I'm very familiar with, what I'm trying to bring to the table, the things that I'm interested in with this company. So I think it's as I think some of the other panels have said, it's an openness, it's this mindset. It's really the mindset. There are tendencies, I mean, when we go out, when we go out for lunch, you'll have, you know, maybe different groups going out together. But overall, at Shell, I don't see that as much. It may be because we're a European company. And we have a tendency to really speak up. We are very, very free to speak up. So that, I think, that type of culture also brings along a lot of different perspectives, different age groups, different appearances, whatever it is. I'm very happy to be working in that type of a work environment. I can say it's not always been that way throughout my career. I have been in instances where it was very top-bottom. Whoever is leading the dinner at the 회식, you know, that person is talking throughout. No one, you know, even peeps up, and they just eat and drink. So it's not that I'm not aware or I haven't been through that type of environment, but I can say I'm very lucky, actually, to be working at this type of an environment. And I'm really hoping that we can provide answers or perhaps alternatives to some of the tensions that we face outside.
But JiWon, this is probably a tribute to your leadership, right? Because obviously you helped create this culture to eliminate a lot of the tension, right? So I guess just a follow-up question is, at your company today, you're not experiencing tension between the Conde generation and the newer generation of workers. Is that correct?
I can't say that we don't have any tension. That would not be true. And there can be differences. Let's say we're looking at one contract or some type of work situation. We can't always all be on the same side. That would be actually quite dangerous for the company. You do need diversity of thought, diversity of opinions. But I think the mood that has to be really supported in any type of discussion is bring it to the table. I'm willing and very able to listen to what you have to say, and then let's really find out what, in a kind of an enterprise mindset, what is the best for the company. Yeah. So I'm not at all saying that there is no tension. There will always be some tension, I think, and I think that's to some degree healthy for any organization.
Sure.
But I think it's the unhealthy part, the not constructive part, the unproductive trends or strains that will harm a company. And I think it's incumbent upon not just the leaders, but also everyone, because it's for the health of the company that you're there.
Sure. And Tyler, at InBev, especially here in Korea, your company's gone through a lot of transformation, right? From a local traditional Korean company to a company that is now part of a multinational conglomerate.
Exactly.
So what kind of tensions and conflict do you see between the akunde concept and the newer generation of workers?
Right. So I think one of the most common tensions, I think, is the traditional sort of hierarchical mindset of, typical Korean companies versus I would say, a more meritocracy-driven culture, which is basically not putting age or seniority as a priority, but your capabilities and your achievements as the number one criteria for any sort of evaluation around performance and whatnot. So the tension that exists is from the kundes, or the older generations, that typically come from a more hierarchical cultural background when it comes to the professional environment, versus the younger generations who are more used to the meritocratic culture, which it's progressed and it's evolved to a significant degree, where our company has now, I would say, more or less embraced holistically the meritocracy culture as a priority. However, I think there's still some ways to go in terms of the older generations that are still in our company versus the new, younger generations that are just joining right after undergrad.
I think that at least, from my perspective, I had a chance to, besides AMCHAM, work for 3 other large U.S. companies. And I can tell you that everything is different. I want people to call me by my first name, James, instead of Mr. Chairman or Mr. President. Right? So I want to see that. But I cannot get that to work. Even in my current organization today, I have a few people calling me James. And I really, really love it. But I have some younger generation who they're scared to call me by my first name. So Rob, obviously in the non-Korean context, I don't think people have called you Mr. Wilkinson before, right? They're always calling you Rob. So how do we make that happen here in Korea?
Yeah, so for context, I'm the only foreigner at Colliers Korea. And from the beginning, I asked people to call me Rob. Nobody calls me Depyonim. It's just not me, right? And I feel more comfortable having that more flat organization. And I think ultimately that should make the team more comfortable as well, that they can speak more freely, communicate easier with me. It's not that hierarchy that you were talking about earlier. I think ultimately that communication and transparency is what leads to a good culture in an organization and obviously makes the organization more successful. In many ways, it will help you retain good talent. If people want to be there, they feel more engaged with their leadership, and the results should then speak for themselves.
What about you, OH? At Qualcomm, does anybody call you OH?
Yeah, most of people call me OH, and still younger generation, they call me 사장님.
Yes.
But the first good feedback I got, from my employees, so many emails, because I sent it out an email, don't use dear among, Qualcomm employees, not even to the CEO. Just call him as Cristiano or whatever. The maximum you can put is hi or hello. Don't say dear. And then I got like probably more than 20, good feedback emails from my employees. And then there was a pretty good start. I sent it out when I became the president of Korea.
So JiWon, from your perspective, do you think it's helpful that your employees call you by your first name or by your title, or does it really matter?
Honestly, it doesn't matter.
Really does not, right?
It really doesn't matter. But I do observe I think within the company, we're all comfortable. They'll call me JiWon, and emails will be JiWon. Could you approve so and so? So that's okay. But we're also living in Korea, working with Korean counterparts. So it's to do with the name cards. Yeah. So while internally we're trying to be very flat, recognizing people for their worth within and their value within the company, there is sometimes some tension, and everyone wants to be promoted, of course. Instead of being a kwajang, I want to be a bujang. I want to be so. Those things also point to me that while we may be in a kind of a bubble, there's also external forces that we have to contend to. Yeah? So I think these type of conversations, if we can get a lot of more people involved, we will truly look at people not just for all the work that they've done, but also the potential that they bring to the conversation. And perhaps we will be able to not look at me as 대표님 or 사장님, but okay, she's the person that leads the companies, the shell companies in Korea. Yeah, so hopefully we'll get there, but I do recognize the realities of external forces.
I can tell you that there seems to be a lot of Korean companies that are eliminating titles. They're forcing people to use an American name, which to me is very, very interesting. I know that there are some big Korean companies, tech companies, that have literally changed the business card. The name of the CEO could be a Korean name, but this person has changed it to a complete American name, which I thought was very, very interesting. So Rob, in your world, how can we make this divide between the newer generation and the older generation become more collaborative in a spirit of teamwork? Because it's there, right? There is a divide.
Yeah, for sure. I think it comes down to several things. Firstly, as I mentioned earlier, communication. People want to feel valued and want to be heard. Ultimately, the organization's goals should be what everybody strives towards. And the younger generation have new ideas and different ways to reach those goals. So it shouldn't be a top-down structure. If that's the case, then the younger generation will feel disengaged, less valued. So yeah, it comes down to communication, making sure everybody's valued, and things are transparent as well.
Obviously, you're in Korea. You don't have a Korean face.
No.
Okay, but I think that whenever new leaders come to Korea, one of the first questions employees have is, "Hey, how old is this person?" Right? That's the old generational thinking. So Tyler, someone like yourself, do you think you can effectively manage and lead a workforce where they're all older than you?
Personally, yes, I think. Don't get me wrong, it is challenging. It is challenging. However, I think it comes down to understanding, how to interact with different generations, whether it be, to your point, someone older than you, or even younger, for that matter. It's understanding what motivates them and what would potentially they might feel offended, right? So understanding those triggers and those guardrails is key. But given that is something that you are willing to understand and take on, then I think it's something that anybody can adapt and work with, regardless of how old your workforce is. So.
Like JiWon in your organization, I know we talked about how Shell has done an amazing job with their culture, but you still have a lot of Koreans working in your organization. So how does age really work in your organization today?
I'd like to introduce something that is very core to Shell, which is our culture for safety. It's called HSSE, and a lot of companies share this very valuable core thought. So HSSE is health, safety, security, environment. That means anyone working for Shell, we are obligated to not only do what's right for me, the individual, but I also look out for my colleague. Yeah? So if we're going down somewhere and someone's not holding the handrails or not putting on a safety belt or whatever issue it is, we look out for one another. So having this overarching culture is actually something that not only unifies all of us, but also gives us an opportunity to speak up. And what do I mean? A very central tenet to HSSC culture is that you intervene when someone may have forgotten. Yeah? So if they're going down or not putting on their safety seat belts, we say, hey, Rob, you forgot. Or you speak up, regardless of how senior that person is. I could say this to the CEO. I could say it to anyone, and everyone is free to speak up.
And you'd expect them to say it to you.
Exactly. And that is not something that I would say, oh gosh, why would you say that to me? I'm a sajang. Why would that is actually, I am so grateful, Rob, that you spoke up and you are showing care that I forgot. So it's taken as a real positive that we embrace it. But this unifying culture, I think, is something that when we do our Shell People survey every year, gets the highest score. How proud are you of HSSC? It's this unifier that brings all of us together. I know all companies will have some different, very unique type of culture that you want to promote and nurture. But for us, I am very proud to say it's our safety culture, and it's something that everyone understands, and they will actually say, oh, JiWon, you forgot to do this, or you have to hold on to the handrail. And I've had instances where that happened to me, and I just take it as, oh, my goodness, this is really working.
Well, this is one of the most amazing, examples I've heard, where Shell's culture and the way they enforce safety is a forcing mechanism, right? To minimize the hierarchy.
It's not even enforced. It's such a value that's ingrained. It's in everyone's DNA, so that even if I'm going down the street and I'm out of the work environment, I actually saw someone the other day, they had their shoelaces untied. And as a responsible, caring person, I could have just kind of walked on by, I'm thinking, oh, that person will be okay. I can't tap them, but I just said, 여기요. And I asked them, I just kind of pointed to their shoelaces, and they said, oh, and they tied it. So it's a culture, it's a mindset, but I'm very happy that it enables all staff, all of my colleagues to actually speak up, show care. And intervention, I think, is really hard when it's a seniority-based hierarchical organization.
Yeah, that's why this is such a great example, right? I think many companies are trying to change, the titles by having no titles. So it's kind of from my perspective, forcing mechanism. In JiWon's case, it's a culture that they've done. So, OH at Qualcomm, do you guys have some of those examples? Kind of like what JiWon brought up, because I think it's very special what she just mentioned to all of us.
Since you brought up the age issue a little bit, so maybe I better go back to that. So Qualcomm is only 36-year-old company, still young compared to other big ones, and we still have a venture startup DNA, and we don't feel bad or shameful about working for younger people. Because, for example, my CEO is just 1 year older than me. And then, so even in our offices, most of my steps kind of older than me. And then the guy who just got promoted to VP is still like, he's 3 years younger than me. So like, it's okay. Like, and then nobody, shows some disrespect, for the older people reporting to younger people. That's completely, not allowed. And company culture itself, it's okay. So that's important, as JiWon mentioned, you have to change the culture, the environment, so you don't feel, like shameful or sorry about working for the younger generation. So,
But just from what I hear, just through some experiences, a Korean may have difficulty working for someone younger than they are. But they may not have difficulty working for a non-Korean. That's why I think, Rob, you may have an advantage, because I don't think people really care or ask you for your age, do they?
I got asked for my age almost every day when I first arrived here. Yeah, I think I am. So I was brought up to never ask somebody's age, politics, or religion. So coming here, it was very much a sort of learning experience that age was such an important thing. But ultimately, I think when it comes to management and leadership, everybody wants the same thing. So if you can demonstrate that you are fair, you're empathetic, and that you can solve their problems, they don't care how old you are,
That's why I think when you mentioned when you first came here, people ask those questions. This is why what you do when you first arrive and how you execute can probably accelerate, how much they embrace you, regardless of your age and other factors.
Yeah, I also think if we're talking about company culture and things like that, Colliers really embraces performance and promoting people who perform well. So somebody new in the organization or younger in the organization can see that you can reach, whatever level you want to reach if you perform well in the organization. It's not to do with your age or your gender or your, religion, sexual orientation, nothing like that. There are no hurdles.
Sure.
I'm younger than a lot of people who are in my position, and that's because I've done well in my previous years working for the company. So I think that shows opportunity for younger people, and they can respect that.
So before we open it up to the audience for some Q&A, I'd like a couple of you to comment on what advice would you give to leaders of your organizations and really making this intergenerational challenge a lot more fluid and a lot more effective. So Tyler, as I said before, I think you're right in the middle. You're not the CEO of the company yet, but you're not the most junior guy either.
Correct.
So what advice do you have for your leaders?
Sure. I think, first and foremost, we're in a very interesting era where the very fact that we're having this sort of discussion already is signaling a change in the traditional Korean society and culture in the workplace. I think my advice, that said, my advice would be, again, it's easier said than done, but to have that mindset and awareness of the gap, try to understand any sort of intergenerational differences in gap and embrace that as an opportunity versus an organizational challenge. And then I think as leaders, you would probably have more responsibility versus the juniors to set examples on how you want to understand or how you want to bridge these gaps. And then I think it will naturally become a mutual effort, both from the older generations or the leaders versus the relatively junior workforce. So I think that would be my number one sort of advice. And again, it's easier said than done, but I think the effort is what really counts. And I think that will be a start of a big change.
And JiWon, obviously we have a crew of different media covering this webinar today. And you as a leader of an outstanding company called Shell, what kind of advice do you want to provide to other leaders in Korea about how to, again, reduce this intergenerational divide? Because you've already built the culture at Shell, right? But part of that comes directly from headquarters. But I'm saying you as a leader.
I think we need to understand context. Yeah. In Korea, when they ask you about age or what school you went to or where you're from, there is a natural curiosity. But why do we do that? Korea, we are homogeneous. We look alike, we sound alike, we have similar last names, and also the history. It's a shared history. I need to know how old you are, what school you went to, where you're from, because I need to understand my relation to you. Yeah? Are you older or younger? And why is that? It's because our language, we have honorifics. And I don't want to be rude, I don't want to be disrespectful. So I'm really trying to maybe show you that it's not just all one-sided. Yeah? You do have to understand the context, the background for all different cultures and countries, regions. In the case for Korea, with COVID, the new things that we're all trying out, I think this is actually a great pivot point where we can actually do things that we thought weren't possible. No one thought we could all work from home. No one thought we could do these type of gatherings over a webinar. Yeah, so things are changing, and I think there are smart people, a lot of smart people, and we do want to do the right thing as well as the smart thing, because that's the productive way to do it. So I do think these type of conversations are meaningful, but at the end of the day, I think not so much my advice, my recommendation would be, and it's the one word that I've written down here, it's to listen. It's really to listen. And a lot of the answers are right in front of you, but it's that openness and really trying to listen would be my recommendation for the day.
How about you, OH? Just your last, recommendation for companies and leaders?
Yeah, maybe a couple of things. So for the leaders, they have to admit they are condes. That's the first step. And only thing you can do is how whether you become a cool conde or a horrible conde. So it's a matter of choice. And then you have to listen to your employees. Especially the younger generation, they care whether their voices are heard. Yeah. They don't expect everything they ask goes through. At least if you can explain you tried hard to to take care of their request, but it couldn't happen because blah blah blah. Then they understand. But at least you have to give them an opportunity to speak up. And the last thing is don't make comparisons. When your parents make comparison, you didn't feel good about it. Like when my mother says, "Oh, this guy went to the Harvard like James," and I couldn't, and of course you don't feel good about it. So, and then younger kids, younger generation, they don't want to be compared to, somebody else. And then one good advice is like I have been running a skip level meeting because I remove all the direct line director and managers. I just talk and have a open Q&A session with the working level employees. And it took over 7 months to go over more than 500 people. I set up 50, people group once a month, and then in the beginning of that session, and, like of course people were afraid of raising any question to 사장님, but at the end of the session they start asking, how many bomb shots you can drink over a night.
Yes.
Like how did you meet your wife, or all kinds of personal questions. Then, then they follow my SNS, and then, like they listen to my directions pretty well, and that actually doesn't change everything in a day, but, you can make some good start of changing the culture, so.
And I think for me, in Korea, there's so many startups these days. So for these startups, unlike the 4 companies here, where you guys have had decades of experience, so for the startup CEOs, now's the time to create the culture where you don't have the intergenerational divide. Because it's always harder to change something than to start something from fresh. So I think that, just through this panel today, we've learned a lot. Very thankful for it. I know we have a bunch of questions. So from the audience, so one thing I want to do is, I think amongst each other, we may have some questions, all right? So, Tyler, do you have any questions that you would like to ask the panel?
Yeah, sure. I think as leaders, one of the most, if not the most important things in managing teams is giving feedback. Just curious how the panel here gives feedback and any sort of best practices, so to speak, especially when you're giving feedback to, the relatively younger team members in your organization.
Feedback. How do you give feedback to the younger generation that might be different from a traditional?
So, we're a relatively small organization here in Korea. So I have a one-on-one meeting with all of my direct reports once a week, but I actually speak to them individually almost every day. So the feedback is constant, both ways. I want them to feel that they can give feedback on how I manage the business and on the decisions that I make. And equally, I give constant feedback on the way that they're performing. Relying on quarterly or annual performance review sessions, I think, has the opportunity for a lot of things to fall through the cracks. And you don't really get a full view of someone's opinion, because they feel that maybe just have once a year opportunity to really vent. Whereas if you have constant daily, weekly feedback sessions, then you don't let things slide into really negative.
Just a follow-up point, if I may, I think personally, it's really, the tricky part with that is how to not come off as a akunde when you're constantly giving or providing feedback for their benefit. I think that's tricky, because you're doing it out of goodwill, obviously, for their improvement. But often, more often than not, I think they are overwhelmed and feel that my boss is a akunde because he wants to coach and all of that. So that's a bit tricky for me.
So is coaching considered akunde-like?
I think it's risky. It's risky. So that technique is really, really important. And if you have that, it's definitely an asset for you.
I think for the one-on-ones that I have, it's a 30-minute slot once a week, no agenda. I actually don't even steer the conversation. I let them speak about what they want to speak about. And actually, sometimes you go in a completely different direction from what you thought you were going to discuss. It's more an opportunity for them to seek feedback rather than a top-down, this is what you should have done.
But hang on a second. So as traditional leaders, one of our jobs is to coach, provide feedback, teach, so that we can all be better. But if, Tyler, what you're saying is that it's akunde to do that, what should leaders do, JiWon?
I go back to the point that I made at the start. It is to listen. Are they coming for feedback? Are they coming for perhaps they have a dilemma and they need a solution? Do they need perhaps a pep talk? So in my case, I have 3 ways of having a meeting. It can be in a meeting room, across a meeting table, or they can choose to come into my room where I have a sofa. And the sofa is kind of like this, like a kiokja, so that I'm not sitting across, but maybe side to side. Or we can go for coffee. And that kind of helps us to maybe walk to the coffee shop, have a coffee, and come back. Is this a situation where you need a whiteboard and we need to talk about it? That's what we do. Or do you need a pep talk? Then it's kind of more a coffee kind of thing. I'm very open to it, and my staff know that they can do this. So it's setting it out very early on. I'm learning as I go. But in order to do that well, I think it is to really listen, and they will give you some of the things that they're asking for. And another big thing for me is I start every conversation almost all the time with, how can I help? I put it out there, how can I help? Sometimes they say, nothing, can you just listen? Or sometimes it's, I have this and this is going on, and that's more a whiteboard type of discussion. But in most cases, I try to start it with, I take a deep breath and then I say, how can I help?
This concept of akunde continues to, be visible here in Korea. That's why I think one of the questions that the audience is asking is, have you ever said and done something in your organization where you quickly reflected and said, wow, that's like akunde action, right? And do you think this type of stereotyping restricts your actions as a leader? So someone like you, OH, right? You must do things from left to right. Have you ever said to yourself, wow, that's a akunde moment, and I should be doing that, right?
Definitely, I have a lot. And probably that's the reason don't make any comparison. So when I say, oh, when I was at your age, or at your career, point of, then people doesn't want to even listen to that anymore after that. And then, but I, keep going over and over because, and I got eventually angry because he doesn't listen to me, right? So then it makes the situation even worse. So don't, just let them speak first. And then as JiWon said, check out why they're here, what they want to help me, from me. Like, is it a direction or feedback or, like console or whatever, they want, you just let them ask, let them speak up and then provide your service based on their request. So that's the most
But Rob, I
important
bet you've never ever thought of yourself as a akunde, right?
I've never thought of myself as a akunde, no.
Right.
Especially, my definition of akunde, as I said, is somebody who's inflexible, unwilling to listen to new ideas. And I think somebody who is from abroad coming into Korea into a management role, if you're inflexible, unwilling to do things a certain way just because it's different, then you're setting yourself up to fail. So I'd like to think that I'm not a akunde. I don't know if people have called me that behind my back maybe, but hopefully not.
Yeah, but Rob, we just talked about this thing called feedback.
Yeah.
Or
sure.
comparing.
And I
Always
seek-
just said if you
yeah.
compare. I cannot believe you have never done that.
What's that?
Not compare, to say, hey, when I was your age or when I did this or
it's
providing
true,
feedback,
and
right?
Very, very true. I think one of the risks that we do fall into is treating these generations as kind of more than a statistical generalization. Those generalizations are there to help a conversation, but they're not there to replace a conversation. So you don't assume that everybody who's older is bad with technology, for example.
Yeah.
You don't assume that everybody who's a millennial is lazy or feels entitled. I think has been mentioned by the other panelists. there's no replacement for the conversation. Getting to understand the person is the only way that you can really understand what drives them, how to engage them, what motivates them, and how, ultimately what they want from the organization.
But as we kind of near the end of our webinar today, I just have a quick few reflections, as well. I think I learned a lot having 4 of you in the panel, and I really, really mean it, sincerely. Obviously, I think the traditional definition of akunde for me has always been about someone working in the same company for decades and someone who's older. Someone like me or OH, right? But I think what the panel taught me today is it's not about age. It's not about how long you work for a company. It's about the mindset. So I think for me, that was a real good learning for me. Another one that I think, JiWon, you talked about, this culture. I know you didn't use the word, the company forces you to do that, but it's a really an ingrained, culture, right? Yes. But I think that we all need those kind of examples. And what I learned finally was about providing feedback. I have a team of people, even in my organization. And sometimes I compare what I did years back so that I can try to teach them some things. I guess that's like being a akunde to do that. So even for me, I'm going to learn from some of the tips you guys have provided. So it's been very, very helpful for me, even as a leader. And maybe I will not be perceived as more of a akunde than I used to be before. And I don't look at myself as a akunde. So with a few minutes left, I'd like each of you to just provide some final, parting comments. We'll start with you, JiWon.
I'd like a day when we don't have to use words like kunde, because putting labels on, like Rob said, it's not really advancing the conversation. It shouldn't take the place of. It's good to know what it is so that we can put a name to a problem, but I would like to really encourage conversation, dialogue, so that we don't have to really have borders and lines and groups and others, because at the end of the day, it's not going to help you and it's not going to help the company.
Yeah. Tyler?
Yeah, so it's a time where I put my marketeer hat on. I think what's most important, well, let me put it this way. I think the point of view I think we should try to embrace is looking at this as an opportunity again, right? Because it's really, when you peel the layers, it's about diversity of thought. This gap, so-called gap, is about diversity. And diversity of thought is the mother of all creativity, all productivity, all things new, all creations. So if you have that lens looking into this so-called issue, I think try to think of it as a positive versus a negative, and I think a lot of great things can actually come from this difference that we're seeing today.
And you, Rob?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's a benefit to have people of different perspectives, different life experiences, and ultimately there's certain synergies that can be created with having people from different with different values and different beliefs. You can address problems in different ways, and I think that's ultimately good for the organization. It's good for your clients. Yeah.
Great. And you finally, OH?
I think the biggest intergenerational tension comes from the definition of work and life balance. So the older generations like boomers or Gen X, they're happy when the work portion is not over 90%. Just happy. But in case of MZ generation, they are shooting for 50-50. And so you have to admit, their goal and try to entertain their request and listen to their voices.
Great.
That's the most important thing, I guess.
Well, again, thank you so much for participating in this panel today. I hope the audience can have some good takeaways like I did, and I hope that we can do more of these sessions. Okay, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.